Hello and welcome to the Teach-In Network, Teach-In on media literacy and activism. We have a bunch of great speakers for you tonight, including media critic Jeff Cohen, journalist Sonali Kolhatkar, Jesse Meyerson of If Not Now, Michael Arria of Mondoweiss, and ZNet's Alexandria Shaner, who helped us organize this teach-in. Big thank you to Alexandria and ZNet. So we've done 5, 6, 7 of these national teach-ins now, and they've been a huge success, and we've had a lot of fun doing them. We've talked to a ton of people, and just want you to know before we get started that you too can host your own teach-in. Check out our extensive list of speakers available on the Teach-In Network. Fill out a simple form there and ask us to connect you to an expert, and we will do it. If you leave a donation, that helps us out a ton too. teachinnetwork.org, no dashes, teachinnetwork.org. So with that, we can get started with our first speaker. Where are we at here? Jeff Cohen will be speaking about the corruption of corporate media, including the anti-Semitism smear, how mainstream media uses misleading IDs and labeling, and the importance of indie media and media activism. Jeff is a media critic, former commentator on MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN, former senior producer of MSNBC's Phil Donahue Show, founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, and he founded the media watch group FAIR and co-founded RootsAction in 2011. With that, Jeff, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Can I talk bluntly tonight?
Absolutely. We hope you do.
All right. I've been a news media critic for 40 years, telling people that they cannot trust news outlets owned by conglomerates and instead should rely on independent media. I think that message is even more important today. For years, I worked in and around mainstream TV news, where I saw the bias and the censorship up close, especially in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq, when I was at MSNBC and I was terminated along with Phil Donahue for trying to ask the proper journalistic questions before our troops went to Iraq, destabilized the Middle East. Look at the media corruption today. The Disney Corporation, which owns ABC News and so much else, has offered what amounts to be a $15 million bribe that they've paid to Trump to settle a frivolous lawsuit against ABC News that legal experts say they could not possibly lose in a court of law. Everyone is now waiting for Paramount, which owns CBS News, Comedy Central, and so much more, to offer an even bigger bribe to Trump to settle a harassment lawsuit against CBS 60 Minutes that Paramount cannot possibly lose in a court of law. And soon after that bribe is paid and the Trump administration approves the Paramount merger, the boss of Paramount, Sherry Redstone, will be nearly $2 billion richer than she is today. It's hard to be an ethical journalist at ABC or CBS News, which is why the boss of CBS 60 Minutes, along with others, has resigned in protest. And there have been journalistic resignations at the LA Times, the Washington Post, because of censorship mandated or sparked by their billionaire bosses. The Washington Post, owned by the fourth richest man on earth, Jeff Bezos, of Amazon. And that's where an award-winning political cartoonist had to quit after they killed a cartoon that showed Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg, and other billionaires at the feet of Donald Trump, offering Trump bags full of money. I launched FAIR back in 1986. In those first years, I would run into one journalist after another that would say, wow, we appreciate that FAIR exists. We appreciate that FAIR is not like all these right-wing media bashing outfits that think all journalists are communists. But one after another would tell me that FAIR was off base on one big issue, and that was what they called our obsession with corporate influence over the news. And I would hear, I've worked in the media for years and never once have I been told what I could or could not report. None of those journalists would make that claim in today's media environment. The good news is that independent media are growing, as they tend to do when social movements are growing, and the mainstream media coverage of those social movements is so nakedly biased, as it has been biased against the movements and the encampments against the genocide in Gaza. Let's get something clear that Dana Bash and Jake Tapper at CNN and so many others pretend not to understand. When I criticized the apartheid government of South Africa and called for a boycott, no one ever accused me of being anti-white, of hating white people. A difficult accusation because I am white. When I've criticized the government of China, I've never been accused of being an anti-Asian or anti-Chinese bigot. When I've criticized the governments of Saudi Arabia or Iraq or Iran, I was never called an Islamophobe. As was obvious, I was critical of these governments, not critical of Muslim people, not critical of a religion. So it's been an amazing achievement of the Israel Right or Wrong lobby, aided by the leaders of both Democrats and Republicans, and of course, much of the mainstream media, that when we criticize Israel or call for a boycott of the Israeli government over its racism, expansionism, genocide, we are accused of being anti-Semites, Jew haters. I've been a critic of the government of Israel for more than 40 years, and I've been a proud Jew the whole time. So it's a very neat trick aimed at protecting the Israeli government from criticism. And the powers that be in the mainstream media, I know many of them well, they are not intellectual giants, but they're smart enough, excepting those at Fox News, to know that they are perpetrating this hoax about anti-Semitism. And some do it out of fear that they will be accused. When I worked inside MSNBC's big newsroom, 2002, 2003, one producer after another approached me privately about their fears of retaliation when they honestly covered the issue of Israel-Palestine. It was the only issue they ever got into trouble over. And this was 2 decades ago. I believe the problem is even worse today. I want to mention one item of media literacy that news consumers should always be aware of, and then I will end with some good news. As a news consumer, you need to be on high alert whether you're listening to NPR or watching CNN or PBS, reading the New York Times. Whenever you see or hear a source or a guest identified only as a former government official, whenever that happens, your antenna should go up because you are probably being lied to. There's a gentleman's agreement in mainstream media that these former officials will only be identified that way, even if they left government 5, 10, 15 years ago, and they won't be identified by what they are currently doing, which is information that you as a news consumer may find even more important in weighing what you are being told. You're not told if these guests or sources are currently working for this or that corporation or consulting for this or that corporation, or what corporate boards that they are on. In the 1990s, when NPR was putting on what they called debates about healthcare reform, and they would feature, it seemed balanced, they featured a former Republican Congress member and a former Democratic Congress member, and the listeners of NPR had no clue that both of these formers who dismissed single-payer government-provided health insurance, what we now call Medicare for All, dismissed it out of hand. And the listeners weren't told that currently both of those former Congress members were lobbyists or consultants for-profit healthcare interests. In 2002 and 3, when I was at MSNBC, NBC and MSNBC kept presenting a guy who was relentlessly pushing for war, retired General Barry McCaffrey. Not told to the viewers of NBC or MSNBC is that McCaffrey, as he was pushing for war in Iraq, was on the boards of corporations that made millions of dollars from the war in Iraq. And viewers weren't even told that this guy was on the advisory board of the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq with a half dozen of the most hawkish neocons on planet Earth. Several times during the 2020 Democratic primaries, CNN trotted out a guy to bash Bernie Sanders, and he would only be introduced as a former deputy chief of staff for Obama, former Obama campaign manager. And unknown to CNN viewers, as he was bashing Bernie Sanders, this former Obama official was currently a communications specialist for all sorts of corporate interests that Bernie Sanders was a critic of, including Google, Uber, Amazon. And obviously, that kind of information would have been important for CNN viewers as they were weighing what they were being told by this guy about Bernie Sanders, but CNN didn't tell them what he was currently doing and had been doing for years. He'd left Obama 8 years earlier. Here's the good news. For the first time in US history, millions of people have access on a daily or even hourly basis to non-corporate and sometimes anti-corporate news. Never existed before. This uptick is because of the internet, which unfortunately is also responsible for an uptick in right-wing hate, disinformation, propaganda, division. On this call, we have these exceptional independent news outlets represented. Sonali with her Rising Up broadcast, Z Network, Mondoweiss. At the RootsAction Education Fund, we sponsor the progressivehub.net website, and we support the Zero Hour with RJ Eskow and Sonali. What I want everyone to do is add everything together. Add in Democracy Now! And Pacifica Radio and all the community radio stations. Add in the Young Turks and left-wing young podcasters. Add in dozens and dozens of websites, whether it's The Intercept or Common Dreams, Truth Out, and you have millions of people every day that are getting serious, journalistically sound, non-corporate news and analysis on the biggest issues of the day. They're not hearing a lot from these outlets about the Kardashians. We leave that to the corporate media. So if you're a progressive activist, you have to be a media activist, which means you use your email, you use social media, you use public forums, you use any means at your disposal to promote the independent news outlets that you trust. Those news outlets don't have big advertising or marketing budgets. We are their advertising department. And the second aspect of being a media activist, besides promoting indie outlets, is challenging media, mainstream media bias and exclusion. And you can do that as an individual, but it's more effective if you do that with organizations, collectively. And one of the best ways I know to do that is to sign up for the action alerts that you get from FAIR, the Media Watch Group, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and that's fair.org. Another great media literacy project is Project Censored, celebrating their 50th year. So when we started FAIR in the 1980s, after President Reagan had been caught on a hot mic making a joke about starting a nuclear war, We had a slogan back then, and it's unfortunately very appropriate today: better media active than radioactive. Ryan, I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was an excellent presentation. I just learned a lot that I didn't know, and I have a bunch of questions. We don't have a lot of time though, so if you could be as quick as you can with these answers. You talked about essentially bribes being paid via settlements. Is that new? Is this a brand new thing? Have we seen this before? I've never heard of anything like this.
I've never seen it before. I've never seen the media more corrupt, the media owners more corrupt than they are today. It's a new thing. Meta did it. They paid a huge bribe by settling a lawsuit they couldn't lose. So yes, it's a new thing and it's horrific. And it's part of the reason that 60 Minutes, boss left the program. One of the
And
most profitable programs in the history of TV, not
and
just
it's
one of the most profitable news shows.
right, and it's totally legal because it's literally through the courts. So
Yes.
very
Yeah.
bizarre.
Yes, it's legal. And everyone knows, everyone who works at these places knows these are bribes. And many of
Right.
these owners gave more than $1 million or more to sit in the front row of the Trump inauguration. That's also new.
Wow. Okay, a couple questions from people. So when we're talking about independent journalists, where are they getting their news if they're not sitting in Gaza? And why should we believe that they're more accurate than like the BBC, for example?
Because the BBC isn't there. Independent media is relying on journalists, many whom have been killed inside Gaza. The independent media outlets are getting their information on the ground. And Robert Greenwald of Brave New Films has a new movie opening, a new documentary about the targeting of journalists working in Gaza. In many places, if you're in a war zone and you have the word press on your upper chest, that's a protection. In Gaza, it seems to be putting a target on your chest.
I would not wear a press thing in Gaza today. Zateo also had a short documentary about the Shireen Abu Akleh killing, so I'm glad that this is getting some attention now, but mainstream media missing. Um, Very quick, Midas Touch, the Midas Network, yes or no? How are you on that?
Yeah, I've learned some interesting stuff from them. It's not in my regular rotation, but
Sure.
I've watched it. I mean, what I've used as my homepage, and the folks over there know it for years. I've used commondreams.org as my homepage. I swear by
Right.
it.
Okay, last question. I'm going over, but I just have so many questions. I'm not going to get to most of them. So when someone is ID'd as a former government employee, they're really just a consultant to big tech or big oil. But this maybe I have to ask Jesse or someone. Someone pitched them to be on the show that clearly identified them in some way, or does the media just have a list of people that they go to that are
I think the
former?
media rounds up the usual suspects. And if they started, like Jim Messina, who kept going on, he's the Obama guy who kept going on CNN to bash Bernie. If he'd been identified as a corporate media consultant for Uber, Google, he probably wouldn't go on again. I mean, if they properly identified their guests, then that gentleman's agreement between these corporate guests and the corporate media would be out the window. But that information about what they're currently doing is far more important than what their government job was 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Right, way more influence outside of the government because there's money involved. Thank you so much, Jeff. I have lots more questions. I might send you via email so we can send out to people. Really great presentation. So much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Thank you.
And our next speaker, Sonali Kolhatkar, she's going to be speaking about her unique path to journalism, how others can become real journalists who battle misinformation. Sonali is a journalist, author of Rising Up, The Power of Narrative in Pursuing Racial Justice, and co-author of Bleeding Afghanistan. Sonali's nationally syndicated broadcast program uniquely centers solutions journalism and airs on radio stations and on free speech TV and is supported entirely by subscribers. You can subscribe to her newsletter at risingupwithsonali.com. risingupwithsonali.com. I'll add that link to the chat. And we just, before you start, Sonali, we had a question in the chat. How are independent journalists paid? So maybe you can touch on that, because I believe it's by the subscribers. So with that, take it away, Sonali.
It's like they read my mind, because that is precisely what I was going to launch into. But just before I launch into all of that, I just want to echo everything that Jeff said. Jeff is someone who I've trusted and had just such an incredible respect for so many years. And I concur with, Common Dreams is one of my go-tos. I'm trying to get Robert Greenwald on my show to talk about his new film about Palestinian journalists being targeted, Project Censored and Fair have just been stalwarts of our progressive media landscape and ecosystem. And the more that we work together and support one another to uphold progressive values and information, the better. I was just interviewing Mara Einstein recently on my show. She is a former marketing executive who's written a book about viral marketing and cults, and called Hoodwinked. And one of the things that she was saying was that the right-wing media is so successful because they all have each other on their shows. They support one another, and not enough people on the left do that, and left media do that. So, and some of us do that, and it's been really powerful for our movement. So how do journalists get paid? Really great question, because I just got laid off. And I want to be a little bit more doom and gloom, even though I'm all about solutions journalism and lifting up the ways in which things are working. Compared to what Jeff was saying, yes, it's true that there's this proliferation of left media, independent media, unbought media. However, there are fewer and fewer and fewer jobs for journalists today. It is a grim, grim landscape. And I very seriously advise young people who are going into journalism today to rethink their career choices. Do not go thinking you're going to graduate to be able to get a good paying job at CNN or wherever, because those jobs are drying up. And it's a very, very serious crisis in our democracy. So I've been kind of a unicorn who has been, up until recently, someone who has almost always had a full-time paid job as a journalist. This is rare in journalism. Never been paid that well, but just about enough to get by. Having a spouse who also works has always helped. But Yes Magazine, that I was working for 4 years, just went under. We lost this huge institution. And part of the problem is, of course, philanthropic outlets, foundations that have a lot of money, who share progressive values, don't fund media very much. They fund campaigns and organizing, which is important, and they fund activists. They just don't fund media very much. I know, because I've looked and looked and looked. There's a few foundations that do, and there's some outlets that get a lot of money, and the vast other groups of journalists and efforts simply don't get that much money. And I think the reason for that is because they feel that the mainstream media, our so-called liberal media, are doing an adequate enough job. And so, we shouldn't be supporting media. Media should just, be their own industry that covers movements. But the fact is, they don't cover movements. And when they do cover movements, they do it either because they're pushed to, or they do a terrible job of it. Case in point being Black Lives Matter in 2020, the media discovered that there were Black people demanding their rights and organizing for them. But for years before that, the media couldn't even admit this basic slogan, Black Lives Matter, till there was a mass movement on the streets. And then very quickly, for a few months, we had some decent coverage. Very quickly, they pivoted. They put out a lot of misinformation and miscast the slogan, defund the police, made it out to be this radical idea that was just about letting crime go rampant, instead of about reinvesting in defunded social institutions that actually keep us safe. So the mainstream media has failed. Philanthropic institutions have failed to support independent journalists. Jobs have dried up. And I remember 4 years ago when I quit KPFK, my previous employer, there were many more jobs out there. I was applying for them. I had several interviews, and I ended up at a place that I really liked. it is no coincidence, nor is it simply ironic that the moment when we need journalism, good, progressive journalism the most, is when there are fewer and fewer opportunities, because predatory capitalism does not like scrutiny. And our mainstream media that are supposedly liberal are very much part and parcel of our predatory capitalist system. And they want to replace journalists with AI. I mean, that is a very, very real situation. They want to replace rank and file on the ground journalists with AI. And of course, the executives will still remain. You have your editors in chief that'll still remain, that will ensure that you don't cast a strong light on billionaires and their agenda. So it is no coincidence that at a time when we need good journalism the most, it is the opportunities for journalists are disappearing. What we're also up against is this plethora, this proliferation of free content that's out there in social media. So majority of Americans get their information from social media. We may not like it, but it's true, right? You see young folks and older folks swiping TikTok, going on Facebook. And what they're up against is this entire sort of gig economy that's developed, where you have social media influencers, viral marketers who have become brand ambassadors, who are putting out information as a way to pull you in, but really they're trying to make a living. That is also no coincidence, because as our economy is failing and more Americans are being pushed out of traditional workforces and workplaces and traditional jobs, they are turning naturally to social media to become brand ambassadors, to make a living, and they're putting out a lot of free content. And the algorithms are being designed to uplift that content. What gets the click and the views and the ad revenues? Rage baiting in content, right? So if you want to grow your followers, which as an independent journalist, I'm constantly trying to grow my followers on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok so that I have an audience that I can put my information out to. And what I'm up against are the folks who are not only putting out only the worst news possible, but conspiracy theories, and who are really lighting this fire under people of things going wrong. And the challenge to that is, even when there is truthful information that's being put out, it's being done so in a way that fuels our cynicism, right? It's being done so in a way that is literally convincing Americans to leave their country. I was just having drinks with a friend yesterday who's an American who's got plans to move to Spain, because she is convinced that we have nothing but fascism left for us in America. We can't outrun our problems. And all we're seeing in our social media feeds is this very cynical sense that fascism is here and there's nothing you can do about it, because they're not uplifting those people who are actually doing something about it. And the mainstream media is not covering, and the algorithms are deprioritizing that. And so we are walking away left wondering, wondering if anyone's solving the problem, and left feeling isolated, left feeling like we just need to escape. And I don't blame folks, right? So we're battling the algorithms, we're battling the fact that the job market is terrible. And so I think that what I'm trying to do is, what a lot of journalists are trying to do, which is basically crowdfunding our jobs. We're crowdfunding our work. So after after Yes crumbled, I tried applying for a few jobs and realized that this basically, most of the jobs out there are for young journalists who are expected to work weekends, twice as many hours, fast-paced environment for like a very, very low salary. And frankly, I'm 50 years old. It's not something that I'm not going to work myself to death. I have to pace myself. And it's important for journalists, by the way, to really think about self-care. We are often suffering from secondary trauma from the work that we cover, from the issues that we cover. We internalize the genocides that we cover, and we don't want to burn out. So I'm crowdfunding my own job. I've had this show that I've now been doing in various versions for more than 20 years. And I have a little bit of a following, in spite of the algorithmic bias. And so I've started an effort to just get subscribers to subscribe for $4 a month to join in, and they'll get all of the access to all of my interviews, transcripts. And I'm focusing on solutions journalism, which was a really important lesson I learned at Yes, which is that it's not about putting a positive spin on the news, because frankly, look, we're all screwed, right? Like, are we living in a world where things are going really, really badly? That doesn't mean that people aren't doing something about it. And if we can have journalism that inspires people to take action rather than fueling their cynicism and fueling their disengagement, because who is that benefiting? That's only benefiting the fascists to be disengaged. If we can have journalism that uplifts the solutions, that showcases, look, there's some young people here who are protesting, for against the Gaza genocide. Look, there's a group of people here who are electing a socialist to their city council. We can be inspired to do more of that, and we can remain engaged and not check out, because the whole point of journalism is to strengthen our democracy. It's not a glamorous field. It's not something that you get, you earn big bucks doing. And if you are earning a lot of big bucks doing it, I sort of wonder I sort of wonder who you're serving in this landscape. I want journalists to do well. I want to do well. But the only way to earn a lot of money and get some big accolades in this day and age is to fuel the cynicism, fuel conspiracy theories, join the mainstream. And so what I'm hoping is that people across the country understand that we need journalists. Journalists have to eat. Journalists can and should be uplifting solutions to our crises so that we can all remain engaged. So I came to journalism from science. My background is in physics and astronomy. I went to school for astronomy. I had this very sort of, gauzy idea of being an academic. And I quickly learned that I wanted to do something more meaningful in my life. And I took my background in education and became a journalist. And it turns out having a science education is excellent for being a journalist, because the idea is that you're synthesizing the news and you're learning truth from fiction, and you understand statistics and you understand how systems work. And I've been in community media my whole life, and now I'm basically in the crowdfunding model of trying to get people to support the work that I do. And I'll just leave you with one last thought. The idea that we are expecting journalists to do so much for so little is something that we should push back on. Let me tell you what I do. If I can get, if I get 2,000 people subscribing $4 a month, $4 a month, right? That's very little. $4 a month, I would be able to sustain a weekly 1-hour program that has 3 video, radio, and transcribed interviews. How is that even possible? It's because I'm doing it all. I'm booking my own interviews. I'm doing the research, writing the script, recording the interviews live to tape with a teleprompter in one hand, B-roll, live production in the other, editing them, mixing it together, uploading it, creating clips for social media, posting it to Free Speech TV, sending it out to radio stations, finding time to fundraise, raising 2 children, taking care of my parents who live in my backyard. And it's a lot. It's a lot. So I don't say this to think, to sort of impress you, other than to think that this shouldn't, many people wouldn't be able to do what I do. I'm only able to do it because I've learned these skills over many, many years and can be very efficient. And I think about the young journalists who aren't going to, be able to do this, and we're going to slip out of the field, and we will all be suffering for it, because the fewer journalists we have, the less healthy our democracy. So anyway, so just to wrap up, support journalists, lift up solutions journalism, don't disengage. If you and try not to consume media that depresses you, because there is a growing sector of journalism that focuses on solutions. Try to seek that out if you find yourself getting really depressed and traumatized and feeling like then nothing's going right and all you want to do is run away to Canada or Europe or wherever, right? So that's all I leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Yeah, I don't get stuck doom scrolling, because right now my Twitter feed is just all the worst news every day you can imagine, so it's tough. I have a lot of questions for you, Sonali, but we're going way over, so I'm not and you answered, so I was going to ask you about AI in journalism, and you got to that. I was going to ask you about crowdfunding a career, and you literally said that. So I guess the big question I get to is, can truth, something you're trying to share, compete with profit driven media? Or is there something else that has to be done? What I mean by that is the conspiracy theorists, the radical, we know what gets clicks is the most controversial, wild stuff. The same way that in campaigns, the politician with the wildest thing to say gets the most donations. That's what the platforms want. That's what the algorithms want. So how do we use truth and honesty? Do we need that audience what do we do?
We have to be creative. We have to be really, really creative. I'll tell you, I'll just give you one example. I'm writing my appeal for next week on my subscriber list to get people who have signed up for free to convert to paid subscriptions. And I know that the things that get the clicks are when you're against something, right? So if you're against something and you put that out there, that's what gets the clicks. And so I decided I'll write an appeal about being against the algorithm that deprioritizes solutions journalism, that deprioritizes joy and successes and models of challenging fascism. And so we have to get creative. And it turns out there's a lot of people who are really, really creative. There's like stand-up comics who are doing incredible work, who are doing political work, who are doing political analysis, and they're able to find ways to defeat the algorithm. There's people inside Gaza who are filming themselves. I mean, and TikTok is a bit of a crapshoot, and you can get some of the worst impulses on TikTok as well as some of the best. So look for those people who are doing incredible things. For example, look up the twins in Gaza. These two guys, they're twin brothers, and they do these incredible videos, and they show you what life in Gaza is like, and they've got tons of followers because they know how to do it creatively. We have to get creative.
Thank you so much, Sonali. As always, thank you for joining us. Last time you joined us during the LA fires, so I'm happy that you're in a safer spot now, and I hope everything is going well for you. With that, we're going to move on to our next speaker. We're running a little bit behind. I'm sorry. These conversations are so interesting to me. Next up is Jesse Meyerson. Jesse Meyerson will be speaking. We'll really be answering the question, whose violence counts as violence in the headlines about Israel-Palestine and police shootings, and whose doesn't? Jesse is a communications director for If Not Now and former communications director for our friend India Walton and her mayoral campaign. Jesse, take it away.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Good to be here with everyone. I direct communications for If Not Now. For those who don't know us, we're an organization of U.S. Jews trying to organize other U.S. Jews against the occupation, apartheid, and genocide policies of the Israeli government toward the Palestinian people. It's also true that I was India Walton's communications director for her campaign, but in between that campaign and this, I was the communications director for a New York City council member named Tiffany Caban, who I don't know if you know her, but she started her career as a public defender and now is an abolitionist socialist in office and visionary public safety thinker. So in both of these contexts, the content of the media focus has a lot to do with violence. In the case of If Not Now, it's about primarily this genocide in Gaza and also the violence in the West Bank and violence against other neighbors of Israel. And in Tiffany's office, it was about community violence, gun violence, traffic violence, sexual and gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and of course, police violence. Okay, so that's the background on me and how I come to this. We know that 70 to 80% of readers only read headlines. So this is going to be an examination of some headlines. Okay, there was a story that happened this week. I'll tell you a little bit about the story and then we'll look at the headlines. Probably you heard something about this. For the last year and a half, the Israeli government and military have, to varying extents, been denying food into Gaza, whose ingress and egress it controls in its genocidal campaign. Recently, this intensified. For 2 months, they let in no food at all, leading to this immense famine. After a ton of pressure, Israel, this week, started allowing in the equivalent of 4 rice crackers per day per person. So just the other day, there was this aid distribution event where tons of starving, desperate people showed up, ready to do whatever it took to feed themselves and their families. And the Israeli military shot into the crowd, killing 1 Palestinian. Okay, so can I share my screen? Is that doable?
Yeah,
Do I
you
have
should
permission?
be able to there. Bottom of your screen, the
Oh
share
yes,
button.
share, and I will. Oh, it's giving me a lot of like exclamation marks and triangles. That's a pity. Okay, I'm not sure that's going to work, so I'm gonna just read you these things and hope that I'm engaging enough that you can get with it all. Okay, CNN characterized it this way: chaos erupts on first day of US-backed aid distribution in Gaza after weeks of hunger. I'll read that again. Chaos erupts on first day of US-backed aid distribution in Gaza after weeks of hunger. Okay, things to notice about this. First thing is the subject of the sentence is chaos. That is who is at fault here. And implicitly, that means that the hero would be order, right? The opposite of chaos. If only we had maintained order, the bad news that we're delivering might not have happened. And the verb is erupt. Chaos erupted, as though it were liquid hot magma spewing forth from the earth under nobody's control. Chaos erupts on first day of US-backed aid distribution. So the US shows up only as an aid distributor or as a backer of aid distribution. And this is in Gaza after weeks of hunger. The hunger is unexplained. Was it a drought? Was it inflation making the price of food too high? We don't really know. And there's no sense that the Israeli government or the US government, who has been financing this genocide, did anything violent. That was CNN's. Here was the AP's. 1 killed, 48 wounded when crowd fired upon at chaotic Gaza aid site, health officials say. I'll try that again. 1 killed, 48 wounded when crowd was fired upon at chaotic Gaza aid site, health officials say. Now, you might miss it because it's at the very end, but actually the subject of the headline is health officials. The headline here is not reporting that a thing happened. It's reporting that health officials said that something happened, which casts doubt on the whole thing in the first place. Otherwise, it's all in the passive voice. 1 killed, 48 wounded, crowd was fired upon by this sort of like phantom actor. And where did it happen? At a chaotic Gaza site, chaotic Gaza aid site. It didn't happen at an Israeli site, even though that's who's controlling the distribution of aid. Lest you think that's just in the US, here's how Sky News from Britain put it: 1 dead and dozen injured after gunfire at aid hub in Gaza. After gunfire at aid hub in Gaza. It's not even construed as a consequence of the gunfire, just simply subsequent to it, conceivably unrelated. And lastly, an English language German site wrote, shots fired as Gaza aid group struggles to distribute. For this example, I'm cribbing from a wonderful academic named Assal Rad, A-S-S-A-L, last name R-A-D. Please do follow Assal on all platforms. You'll get lots of really good analysis of headlines like this. But this is not a new thing. And I was reminded, looking at this post, of an example that I remember from the 2018-2019 March of Return, which was, you'll see in headlines, Gazans, what's not generally discussed is that most of the 2 million plus people of Gaza are not Gazans. They are refugees from other parts of Palestine who were forced there in the 1948 Nakba catastrophe, when the state of Israel was founded by removing a bunch of Palestinians from what is now Israel, and many of them came to Gaza. So they had this giant march for return, demanding to go back to their homes. They showed up in tens of thousands. It was almost entirely nonviolent. At most, one Israeli was killed, maybe zero, fewer than a dozen wounded, whereas the IDF killed hundreds of Palestinians and injured almost 10,000. And the Times, in this story that I remembered and looked back at, said on the homepage, it said the image, which I wish I could show you, is of tires burning in the background and black smoke filling the air, and a Palestinian with a slingshot hurling a stone. That's the image of this. And the headline that they put on the homepage is 4 are killed in Gaza protests, including a 15-year-old boy. Killed by whom? Bullet point. Israel's defense minister, the only person quoted here, said that there were fewer people as Palestinians protested for a 4th Friday, but that there was more, quote, terror activity. Perhaps the terror activity being illustrated above with these burning tires and this slingshot being activated. Another bullet point, the total number of fatalities from the protest campaign has risen to at least 38. Fatalities from the protest campaign. That is what they are saying, the protest campaign. Who is responsible for the violence of the fatalities. In the article itself, I won't read the full 4 paragraphs to you, but just know that the second paragraph lists a ton of allegations of violence against Palestinians. Some of them burning tires, hurling rocks, or flying kites with flaming tails in the hope of setting ablaze the fields of Israeli rural communities on the other side. The Israeli military distributed a photograph of one kite with a scrawled swastika. And it's not till the 4th paragraph that we hear, but by evening, the Gaza Health Ministry reported 4 killed by Israeli sniper fire. And I should say that the caption under this same picture of the tires burning is a Palestinian protester during clashes with Israeli security forces near the border east of Gaza City on Friday. Clashes. Where's the violence? The violence is all there ascribed to the Palestinians who are being killed for this mass nonviolent action. Just want to say that this is not only true in Israel-Palestine, this is true here when we encounter police violence and officer-involved shootings. I similarly remembered another event that blew my mind, so I looked it back up. And this is a story from a few years ago. In the New York Times, it's being covered. Stray police bullet kills girl as officers fire at suspect in Los Angeles store. Who killed the girl? The stray police bullet. The officers, they were busy firing at a suspect, but the bullet killed the girl. Here's the subheadline. The suspect was killed, and a shot pierced a wall, fatally striking a 14-year-old in a dressing room during the confrontation at a clothing store, the police said. Again, the officers were busy killing the suspect, but the shot is what pierced the wall, fatally striking the girl. That's the New York Times. The AP's headline was, Los Angeles police video shows officer shooting that killed 14-year-old girl. Again, it's not the officer who killed the girl. It was the officer shooting that killed the girl. Valentina Orellana Peralta, who was hiding with her mother inside the dressing room, was killed in the shooting. Again, passive voice. Video released Monday showed, this is the lead paragraph. Video released Monday showed Los Angeles police firing at a man suspected of assaulting customers last week at a clothing store. A shooting that also killed a 14-year-old girl hiding in a dressing room who was struck by a bullet that went through a wall. Again, it's the shooting and the bullet that did the violence. The officers were busy killing the suspect. Now, why were they shooting at at somebody who was suspected of assaulting customers last week at a clothing store? We don't know. It doesn't matter, because what the police were doing was not violence. Just like when the Israeli military and the U.S. weapons manufacturing apparatus, they are not capable of violence. For more on the sort of propaganda thing, I would follow Alec Karakatsanis, another great person to follow. You'll be glad you did. Okay, and the closing thought that I'll leave you with is that if editors chiefs of newsrooms determine that somebody in the story is a good guy and that somebody in the story is a bad guy, nothing the good guy does can be classified as violence. It has to be put in passive voice and questions left. And in fact, in the Gaza case, you have the US only showing up as an aid distributor. And on the other hand, if the bad guy is anything other than perfectly nonviolent at every single second, then that is the story, their violence. So whose violence counts as violence in these headlines? That's the thing I would urge you to remain cognizant of as you read the news. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent presentation, Jesse. That I'm sitting over here muted, talking to myself. People probably watched me just being like mad over here. That is wild. Just the wording can manipulate you so much. When we talk about the passive voice and the specific uses of where's the noun, where's the verb, who did what, who's to blame, I find it hard to believe that journalists are just bad people, right? That doesn't compute with my sense of the world. So is it out of disdain for the victims or out of protection of the offender? Cops in Israel. Is it to protect them or is it to be racist? Like, it seems to be one more than the other.
I think those are actually one and the same goal. I think it's to cast these stories as morality plays between a hero and a villain. And so the hero you have to exonerate, and the best way of exonerating the hero is indicting the villain. Both things do the same work. And I will just note, as you say, like, it's hard to believe journalists are just bad people. I will say that for the most part, journalists don't headline their own stories. And so there are a lot of really good journalists out there calling in quotes, risking their lives in war zones, going around, beating the pavement, trying to verify facts. And then they put their copy in front of an editor and an editor puts a headline on it. And again, 70 to 80% of people just read the headlines. So the good journalism rarely goes appreciated, and really it's the headlines that count. And editors are much more accountable to CEOs and advertisers and shareholders, et cetera. And so have a vested interest in sort of encouraging the narratives that will please those people, rather than journalists who, as you imply, are often doing really good.
So even if you have this excellent journalist like Sonali, if she's working for a big mainstream outlet, it's going to go to that editor who's thinking about his next raise and how to get that story clicked on more. So wow,
I'll say
it
another
really
thing.
just waste people's skills.
I've known really good journalists who work for the New York Post, which is a Rupert Murdoch-owned right-wing rag, and their job isn't even to write the stories. They go to the site, they interview people, and they call in quotes, and the editor just puts it in the right-wing sort of like propaganda phrasing.
Okay, last question because we're so behind. What's the uniting factor there? How do police, the propaganda in Israel, how do they interact with our media or government to create this effect? Or is it just because it's an easy narrative that makes money?
I would say that the enforcement apparatus, which is police, militaries, borders, surveillance, that all is the security system for capital. And so capital has an interest in valorizing it. And the way capital is able to structure society so as to extract the maximum amount of profit for itself is by creating racist tiers in society. And so you have Palestinians or you have Black people who serve as this underclass, and the best way to keep them to be an underclass is to consistently portray them as dangerous threats who have to be kept in check. Otherwise, we, Jews or white people or whoever the sort of the group whose fear these media outlets are trying to activate, or will suffer if they're given the sort of freedom that our commitment to human rights would demand that they have.
All right. Thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciated. Great presentation there. Learned a lot again. Wish I could ask more questions, but got to move on now to our next speaker, Michael Arria. He'll be talking about the context around how mainstream media covers Gaza activism and Trump's crackdown on it. Michael is Mondoweiss' U.S. correspondent. He produces The Shift, tracking U.S. politics and Palestine, and Power Pushback, covering the Palestine movement and the repression of Palestine activism. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to all the other panelists and people for tuning in. I thought Jesse's analysis was great and kind of provided like a good segue for what I'm about to talk about. I was kind of reflecting on this idea of media literacy. It was kind of thinking about the times where mainstream media actually does cover the story, because I think we've seen that recently. I mean, genocide has been going on for so long. This week I saw, like Piers Morgan, I don't know, officially came out against it or made some comments to that effect. We're seeing a lot of people, kind of finally come to this conclusion, and inevitably it develops this kind of space where we actually see some good mainstream reporting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that context and how, alternative media, indie media is so important to kind of inform that mainstream reporting. I'm thinking in particular, recently there was a really good piece, I thought, a comprehensive piece in the New York Times about Project Esther. And this is a proposal that was developed by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, to kind of counter the Palestine movement in the US. They frame it as countering anti-Semitism. If you look at the kind of details, it's exactly what's happening under Trump. It's this plan to deport international students, purge pro-Palestine faculty from schools, to fund organizations that support Palestine, and really to use anti-terror laws in order to kind of stifle dissent. I thought it was a really good piece, but, Project Esther was developed in October of 2024. A lot of sites like, our site, Dropsite News, Intercept, a lot of places that Common Dreams, places that we have already been identified tonight have been covering Project Esther for quite some time, and also covering the kind of wider context, what leads up to something like Project Esther, which is, years of these anti-BDS laws, these attempts to, codify the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates some, criticisms of Israel as anti-Semitic. So it's like, even though the New York Times has got on this and it's good, and they actually did a recent piece too, I thought that was pretty good, about Canary Mission, the group that, targets students and doxes them and tries to, prevent them from getting employment. But a lot of this stuff has been around for quite a while. And I think another kind of great recent example of this phenomenon, was earlier this year when 60 Minutes did, again, what I thought was a really good report on Gaza and the US connection to it. And, they had a story where at the beginning you see kids kind of playing with, like ammunition casings in Gaza, kind of kicking them around. And then, the narrator of that story, I think it was Cecilia Vega, goes on to tell viewers that the ammunition casings that they're seeing were produced in the United States. And the segment goes on to interview a bunch of State Department officials who quit the Biden administration over the genocide. A real historic number of people did that. I think, we didn't see anything comparable during, say, like the Obama administration, during, like the drone program or anything. But the thing about that story is that the footage that they took of the kids was from May. And, the people that they interviewed, virtually all of them had quit their positions months before the segment ran. Some of them quit their positions, a full year plus before the segment ran. And they're running the segment after the election had already happened. So Trump is about, I think, a week from going into the White House at that point. And they're telling you, this is how the Biden administration is essentially complicit in this carnage in Gaza. But it's no longer having the effect that it would have potentially if they were running the piece while the people, these people were still in power. And that came just a couple weeks after 60 Minutes did a segment, I think, all but kind of like celebrating the pager attacks on Lebanon that Israel carried out, which killed a number of civilians, including a young child. So I just think even when the mainstream gets these things right, we're kind of lacking that context, or the timing is kind of suspicious on that level. And I think the only other thing I wanted to mention, and something I think about a lot, have been thinking about a lot just because I cover this group a lot in my work, is the way that the Anti-Defamation League is handled by the mainstream media, which is an organization which obviously has like a deep problematic history, and people can, go online and read about it. There's a number of activists who have been pushing for quite some time for nonprofits and human rights groups to sever their ties to the organization based on their behavior. But I'd say in recent years, it's gotten even worse. There used to be a part of the ADL's FAQ session, if you went on their website, that explicitly said that not all forms of anti-Zionism are anti-Semitism. And I've quoted that a couple times, and I went to link to it the other day, about 3 weeks ago, and I realized that I had to use the Wayback Machine to bring it up because they had scrubbed it from their website, which it just shows that the group has gotten even more extreme with Jonathan Greenblatt at the helm. And, Jonathan Greenblatt is consistently invited on, mainstream channels every year. The ADL puts out this audit, this anti-Semitism audit, which alleges that anti-Semitism is skyrocketing or hit some all-time high. I think the last one that came out claimed anti-Semitic incidents have gone up by something like 500% in the last decade, which is obviously a staggering statistic to hear, and would understandably, make people concerned and nervous. Jonathan Greenblatt, when he goes on these shows, whenever this audit comes out, he goes on CNN and MSNBC and talks about these things. He's never confronted about the methodology for that report. And if you look at that report, the ADL counts anything, criticisms of Israel, criticisms of Zionism, in the same way that they count actual anti-Semitic incidents. So students chanting from the river to the sea, or professors holding a panel that references the Intifada, that is equated in this audit the same way that literal Nazis going into a cemetery and desecrating tombstones with swastikas is. And he's never challenged on that. And we see now that conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is kind of being used as a basis to try to detain and deport people in this country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said it essentially many times, that the reason why they're attacking students is because they claim that pro-Gaza protest is anti-Semitic, and anti-Semitism is antithetical to the U.S.'s foreign policy. So it's a very important subject, I think, and he's never challenged in any way whatsoever. He's brought on consistently, and the group is cited consistently as a civil rights organization, despite the fact that he was recently asked on CNN what he thought about Trump, scooping up students off the street and kidnapping them and detaining them. And Jonathan Greenblatt said that the ADL wasn't concerned with what he termed as Hamasniks, that wasn't their job to protect people like that. So this is a group that I think is obviously much more concerned with protecting Israel than it is with documenting anti-Semitism or combating it in any way. There was a big pro-Israel rally shortly after the bombing began in 2023. Jonathan Greenblatt was invited on MSNBC to talk about that rally. I think 25,000 people showed up. He said that close to 300,000 people showed up. He wasn't challenged on that at all. He wasn't asked about the fact that Van Jones was booed when he, said something in his speech during the rally to the effect of wanting peace in the region. People screamed no ceasefire at him. And he wasn't asked why anti-Semitic pastor John Hagee was a speaker at that event, a guy who has said that Jewish people brought the Holocaust upon themselves by disobeying God, a guy who says that the Antichrist will come back to earth as a Jew. This was a person who the ADL, which ostensibly is here to, exist to combat anti-Semitism, invited to this rally, and they have to face no questions about it. So I think, if somebody's watching a cable news station, they might get a report on, Mahmoud Khalil, or one of the many students who's been detained. They might get a report on, the Trump administration shredding the Constitution in the name of alleged, combating of anti-Semitism. But then shortly after that, they might see Jonathan Greenblatt on their television kind of telling them that, spitting out these staggering numbers and kind of suggesting that, campuses are out of control and they need to be reeled in. So I think even when the mainstream media gets these questions right or does good reporting, I would just, end by kind of echoing what's been said quite a bit already on this panel, which it just, I think, underscores and highlights the need for independent media, alternative media, and we're just calling people to support those type of media and those type of organizations that have been telling the story for quite a long time, whether it hits the mainstream or not.
Thank you so much, Michael. A couple quick questions for you. Talking about the ADL a lot there. To me, the ADL seems, or maybe it's to normies who aren't like deep into this stuff, the ADL almost seems like an official thing. Like they are the decider on what's racist to a lot of people. And they, from what I remember, they didn't think Elon's Nazi salute was problematic.
Yep.
which is why, like, they blamed it on, well, he's on the spectrum, and this is, you know, it's very weird. Do you think the ADL is losing, I don't know if support, trust, I guess, in media at all from this? Because it's comical in how they've treated things. Do you think that their stance is lessening any?
I'm not sure it's lessening among media. I think it is lessening among kind of activists, progressives, people who are kind of pay close attention to media. There's a campaign called Drop the ADL. I'd encourage people to check it out, which has a lot of great information about what the organization actually does. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but kind of calls on people to sever ties with it. I should have mentioned the Elon Musk thing. You're absolutely right. I think that is another example of how that group all but ignores, real actual anti-Semitism on the right, while, going at the left, obviously, for the crime of supporting Palestine. And I think the sad thing is we don't actually have a group that documents anti-Semitism. It's not a group that can be taken seriously, insofar as we connect the struggle against anti-Semitism with the struggle against Islamophobia or anything else. It's sad that the one group that's kind of looked at to do that cannot be trusted in any capacity.
And one quick question from the chat: is J Street better than the ADL in this regard? I would say to some degree, yeah.
Yeah, I would say to some degree, yeah. I mean, J Street, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. They're obviously like a liberal Zionist organization. It took them, I think, 100 days to come out and oppose the genocide. Initially, when it first started, they were threatening to pull support or potentially back primaries for lawmakers who supported a ceasefire. So it's just something to keep in mind when we think about J Street.
Yeah, Norman Solomon from RootsAction had a great piece. Has J Street gone along with genocide, from March? So he's written about that. I urge you to check that out. Okay. Michael, one last thing. If students can be removed for fake anti-Semitism, what type of journalists can colleges even produce?
That's a really good question. I think there's a much deeper question here, which we don't have time for, which is just we're getting to a point where what is the function of the university system in this country,
Right.
if they're going to just cower to what the Trump administration says, and I think we're really we've seen student journalists get suspended in the same way that we've seen activists get suspended. So I think it's a deep and important question, certainly.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate you. Appreciate your time here and all the work you do. Moving on to our last speaker from ZNet, Alexandria Shaner. She's going to be providing an editor's guide to critical media literacy. She's from ZNet, znetwork.org, which I'm going to post the link here, strongly suggest you check out. Put that in your rotation of your media diet. Lots of great stuff there. She's also a writer for Extinction Rebellion. Her work has appeared in Common Dreams, Foreign Policy in Focus, LA Progressive, Waging Nonviolence, Anti-War. There were a lot of other ones, but those are the only ones I wrote down. So great to have you, as always, Alexandria. Please take it from here.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you to all the fellow speakers tonight. I think we're going to shift gears a little bit for this last presentation. So yeah, I'm just appreciative of everyone's work so far in really connecting the intersection of critical media literacy with activism and what's going on in the world right now. So I'd like to start this presentation by laying out not only what this section will be about, which is really kind of an actionable skill share more than a topical presentation, and to explain why we decided to include it. So this is our editor's guide to critical media literacy, and I happen to be a self-taught media professional, and as it turns out, so are most of my fellow editors currently at ZNet. And I mention this not because I'm saying that you all need to skill up to become actual editors and journalists, unless of course you want to, but to highlight that though these skills aren't commonly taught in general education, they are absolutely learnable, and they are urgent and critical. So the intention behind this presentation also is not to cover everything, but just to open a pathway to further develop these skills. And I'll be sharing just some of my own editorial experiences in the hopes that they're useful to any of you who are interested in developing your own critical lens through which to engage further with the media. So very, very briefly, because we haven't actually stopped to define this concept yet tonight, what is critical literacy? Basically, it means being able to read, think about, and question the world around us, especially when it comes to issues of power and justice. So it's not just about understanding what we read, but it's also about noticing who produces and disseminates information, like in the media or in schools, why they create it, and how it affects people. So when we think this way, we can better understand the world and become active participants in transforming our lives and maybe even our societies. And then specifically in terms of media, critical literacy equips us with the tools to really think more deeply and independently about the media that we're consuming. And what that does is help us resist manipulation, understand underlying biases, make more informed decisions about the information that we accept and then share and then act upon. Why is it important for you to engage with the media like an editor? Why did we decide to frame this Skillshare in this way? I would say that in one word, it's about empowerment of yourself and of your communities. You can and should have agency in how you interact with the media. And you are also, in a way, already kind of an editor and publisher within your own circles when you choose to share and act upon media that you consume. And then this has a ripple effect beyond your circles. So with that kind of framed out for you, let's jump into some actual skill building. Starting with, what are some helpful tools to establish for yourself? And I remember after my presentation at one of our previous teach-ins, the non-cooperation with Trump back in March, the most common question that I received after doing my section on the media was about where and how to find trusted sources of independent media. And Ryan and I, as well as a few of our participants in that teach-in, shared a short list of some publications and some journalists that we personally trust and respect, which is great. However, just sharing a source list doesn't really help you make up your own mind, and it tends to sometimes result in information silos. So we also advise people to check out platforms like ZNet. This is because Z posts not only original content, but also curates lots of previously published content from sources all over the world, from major outlets to personal blogs, including work from many of our panelists tonight. And this daily editorial work is a service that we try and provide to our readers to introduce a diversity of sources, authors, and topics that are also seriously and independently vetted. And that's not to say that you should take what we post as infallible. You absolutely should not. But we aim for our editorial work to be a helpful leg up and a time saver for our readers. And we're not the only publication that does this. I'm just using what I know tonight as an example. And then importantly, in addition to that, we also always cite the original publisher on any reposted work so that you as a reader can then choose to follow any of those sources directly if they are particularly relevant to you. And that's one great way to kind of build your library of trusted and useful media sources for yourself. Now, to really get the critical lens working, you can replicate some of our most basic editorial work for yourself by just having a little bit of knowledge and resources in place. Three really easy things is if you know the writer and their work or their style, if you know the publisher or platform, and if you know the topic being written about. So these 3 points can be helpful shortcuts to being fairly confident that you have trustworthy information, but they're definitely not absolute and they're not always available. So critical literacy is about questioning at the end of the day. So when in doubt, it's also important to just ask others who might know the topic well to give you their opinion on the quality and the value of the material that you're looking at. And then over time, you can also even develop a group of people who you consult with and learn together with, kind of like a media reading group, or it can be something less formal. But these are basically all just basics that you can start to build up for yourself to give you a leg up in assessing and trusting information and its meaning for yourself. Now, that's kind of in an ideal world. And what if you find yourself without access to these resources or outside the bounds of these constraints? So we'll spend the rest of this presentation talking about further developing your critical media lens. Like I said, no one editor, no one person can be or needs to be an expert in all things, nor familiar with all authors and all publications. However, by using a critical media lens and a bit of a cautionary logic, many mistakes can be avoided. So as just a few starting guidelines, I'll share with you tonight with a few examples of how to apply a critical lens to your media intake. The number one thing that I would suggest is understanding motivations. This is absolutely crucial for identifying bias and manipulation. Some starting questions that you can ask yourself is follow the money. We talked a little bit about this with Sonali. Who's funding this? Related, but not exactly the same, is follow the benefit. Ask yourself who's benefiting from this. Some further questions you could frame it as is who's behind this message? What are their interests? Are there hidden agendas? So understanding motivations overall is one of the most important points. And because of this, I'm going to take a little more time on this one and give a couple real life examples. So to start off, like a really easy thing, and this is hypothetical, but you can imagine, take an article promoting Tesla's wonderful environmental contributions, and you find out that article was funded by something called the Elon Musk Foundation. Now, that should make you skeptical based on an obvious conflict of interest. Going more subtle from here, say there's another article promoting a Democratic Party candidate written by a Democratic Party insider. Now, this article needs to be considered differently than a similar article written by an independent author. So it's good to consider things from diverse perspectives, but you want to avoid inadvertently becoming a mouthpiece for powerful people, corporations, and institutions. Last, a really, really common example these days is greenwashing. I recently came across an article, a paper advocating that deep sea mining would be a boon to the health of the planet and to world peace. Now, that would be really nice. But a few clicks of some of the hyperlinked citations revealed that the main source of this analysis turned out to be funded by the company Lockheed Martin. So, oh yes, one of the largest military contractors in the world and one of the biggest polluters in the world is promising to share resources peacefully and fairly in order to lead a green energy transition. That just doesn't sound very likely. I don't need to be a geologist or a policy wonk or even a climate scientist to raise an eyebrow at that. And I'm sure neither do you. All right, so moving on from that kind of like number one thing to look out for, understanding power structures. So rather than feeling pressure to become an expert in one topic or hyper-informed and stressed out overall, critical literacy can really enable us to understand the relationship between media and power. We talked a little bit about this tonight. If you want more in-depth on this topic, I encourage you to go out and check out my previous presentation at the March teach-in or lots of other resources on this relationship between media and power. And just when you engage with content, understand how it fits in the general power structure. Moving on from here, another great tip is recognizing stereotypes and social constructs. So again, we had a bunch of examples of this tonight where the media often perpetuates stereotypes about race, gender, class, or even like entire nationalities of people or other aspects of identity. So learn to spot these, question their origins and their impact, and ask how they influence your perception of different groups. And from there, you can challenge these harmful narratives. And this is especially relevant in defending against these divide and conquer tactics that are really meant to weaken and control the public in the service of powerful interests. An important next one is evaluating credibility in sources. As we all know, in the age of digital media, misinformation can spread really quickly. So don't forget to stop and assess the credibility of sources, cross-check information, avoid being misled by false or biased reporting. I know this sounds daunting and maybe like extra work, but it does get easier with habit, and it relies heavily on common sense. So you don't need to be the expert, you just need to use your sense. And it just takes a few extra seconds usually. Another one that Jesse covered in his section tonight extensively, so I really don't need to elaborate with examples, but deconstructing media techniques. So this can be advertisements, political campaigns, news outlets, all using various techniques to persuade, influence, and sell ideas. With critical literacy, it involves understanding how these techniques work, such as their use of emotional appeals, selective framing, sensationalism. Recognizing these strategies helps us see beyond the surface level content and understand what are the intentions behind this message, whether that came from the journalist or the editor or the publication. It can become obvious to us. And the take home being is, if clear language isn't being used, especially in something like a headline or reporting facts, we should be asking why, and we should assume that it is not an accident. Last, a really easy one that absolutely anyone can do and is also crucially important is resisting the race to be first, resisting the pressure of this like 24-hour news cycle or constant drip feed of information through our phones. Especially with news-related content, there's often a flurry of substandard at best to outright wrong content at first. So patience and rigor should always be prioritized over the race to be first. And for content relating to breaking and unfolding events, it's really good to just make sure the analysis and facts are solid. And when in doubt, wait before taking this information seriously, let alone sharing it or acting upon it. So I know that was really quick, and there's so much more that we could cover on this topic, but all of these points are what you can think of and hopefully utilize as like an ongoing skill building thing that you can do. And the main take home is that instead of passively consuming media, a critical approach encourages active engagement with it. It allows us to ask deeper questions, challenge assumptions, and form our own opinions, which then empowers us to actually participate more fully in discussions and in decisions. On the flip side, it also helps us to recognize the power of the media itself in shaping society and how we can use that power collectively to advocate for a positive change. And I'll wrap up by just saying that you are all very, very welcome to continue this conversation and to seek more resources by interacting with us at the Z community anytime. And I appreciate your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. Excellent stuff as always. Couple questions and then we'll get out of here because we are running super late, but it's been a great program. So appreciate everyone who's stuck around, and all of our speakers have been excellent. I really like the idea of it's like this drip of content versus being patient. And I guess a lot of that has to do with knowing what you're being patient for, right? And for me, that looks like waiting for someone I trust to publish an article about it, whether that's Klippenstein or like one of the podcasters that I actually trust, or Ryan Grimm or something like that. I guess, how long does that take to build out this trustworthy network of like, okay, there's been a shooting, I'm not gonna listen to what Twitter is saying right now, I'm gonna wait until a story. Like, how long does that take to find those people?
That's excuse me, a really good question. And I would say that there's not really a set like stock answer that I can give for how long it takes. And it's actually a dynamic process where there's people that I have trusted in the past that I now feel a bit differently about. So it's not a one and done thing either. And I know that for me, developing myself as an actual editor and publisher, I'm still learning. I definitely come to it with humility and a learner's brain. And that's why I advocate critical literacy for everyone, because I know that I'm not always right. One easy thing is, definitely don't trust the Twitter buzz. Wait until you can find some verified information, because even people who you trust sometimes fall for that trap of wanting to be first or getting caught up in the buzz. All I can say, I can't tell you how long it's going to take, or, if there's a threshold you need to trust somebody or not trust somebody. But what I can say is the more you do this and the more you engage critically, the more your own confidence and comfortability in your own critical skills to constantly make those dynamic judgments is going to be stronger. and that you don't need to do it alone. People think like, oh, I need to be the expert, or if I ask a question, I'll seem like I don't know what I'm talking about. Do this in community, do this in dialogue, and it will be more effective, and you will spread it among your people.
Excellent. All right, last question. When you're vetting a journalist, when you're vetting a story, I've found that like you're saying, you trust someone, and then something happens in the news and a blind spot gets revealed. NATO, Zionism. There's these things where you think someone's totally on your side about everything, and then it's like, whoa. So I guess when you're looking at people, how much are you going issue by issue? This is the person I trust on what's going on in Gaza versus like the person, like I trust Ken Klippenstein or Ryan Grimm or someone like that. Like, do you separate it by issues with people at all?
Yes, in terms of like needing to not spend all day, every day doing only editorial decision making. So like there is a bit of like shortcuts that are sometimes taken. But I would say theoretically, in an ideal world, what I would trust is your own critical lens and like some of that logic that I laid out, where you're looking at basic heuristics and norms of, you know, how are they presenting this information? Where did this information come from? Is it verified? More than just, I tend to trust this person's analysis. We all need to take some shortcuts, and so that's fine. But again, it's a give and take. And yes, some people I'm like fully in agreement with on certain issues. And then there's this one issue where I'm like, where is this coming from? And that's fine. And that just happens. But again, that's the importance of develop your own critical lens and learn how to be in dialogue with others about it, because it's also possible to change your mind. And that's really, I think, the focus that is most beneficial over the long term.
Great. Thank you so much, Alexandria. Appreciate you. Appreciate ZNet and everybody else that joined us here today. If you aren't doing anything tomorrow, there's a DNC executive committee meeting, and one of our campaigns, the Progressive Hub, will be live streaming it with commentary from all sorts of people. So I encourage everyone to follow that. Let's, in line with our media activism, let's follow what the DNC is actually doing, so we don't just have to listen to other people's reports on it, and we can begin our building and continue building our own trustworthy network of media folks who we know are going to give it to us straight, who aren't writing headlines for profit and don't have editors who change their work to say something other than they meant to. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Alexandria, before we sign off?
No, I just appreciate everyone's time and interest in this. It's a really crucial topic. And yeah, just to echo what I said before, please feel free to get in touch, and hope to do more of these soon.
All right. I've added that link to the YouTube for our thing tomorrow. And with that, everybody have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for joining us. This video will be available in the next 24 hours or so on YouTube. So thank you.